and welcome. You're watching Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha, Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you. Let's begin with our top story, which is from the United States. Well, in this story, we're going to focus on the fast-evolving strategic relationship between India and the U.S. Speaking at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken talked about the dynamism of the U.S.-India strategic partnership, citing collaborative efforts in various fields. Blinken said, and I quote, "The U.S.-India strategic partnership has never been more dynamic as we team up on everything from advanced semiconductors to defense cooperation." In his remarks on power and purpose of American diplomacy in a new era, Blinken said the Biden administration has elevated the Quad partnership with India, Japan and Australia to deliver for the countries and the world on everything from manufacturing vaccines to strengthening maritime security and addressing climate challenges. He went on to say, and just this past week at the G20, President Biden and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi announced another ambitious transportation, energy and technology corridor that will connect the ports of Asia, the Middle East and Europe. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, France, Germany, Italy and the European Union will team up with the US and India to turbocharge clean energy production and digital connectivity and strengthen critical supply chains across the region. The new economic corridor marks a significant step in reshaping regional connectivity and trade dynamics with an emphasis on sustainability and shared benefits. During their high-level meeting ahead of the G20 summit in New Delhi, Prime Minister Modi and President Biden reaffirmed their commitment to advancing shared goals. They highlighted the importance of the India-U.S. major defense partnership that includes expanding cooperation in emerging domains and like space and artificial intelligence. Let's listen in to what Antony Blinken said.
We're renewing and deepening our alliances and partnerships and forging new ones. Go back just a few years, and some were openly questioning the capabilities and relevance of NATO and America's own commitment to it. Today, the alliance is bigger, stronger, more united than ever. We've added an incredibly capable new member in Finland. Sweden will join soon, and NATO's doors remain open. We've enhanced our deterrence and defense, including adding 4 new multinational battalions to NATO's eastern flank and increasing defense investments to address emerging challenges from cyber attacks to climate change. We're transforming the G7 into the steering committee for the world's most advanced democracies, combining our political and economic muscle to not only address the issues affecting our people, but also to offer countries outside the G7 better ways to deliver for their people. We've raised the level of ambition in our relationship with the European Union. Together, we account for 40% of the global economy. We're using that power to shape our technological and economic future to reflect our shared democratic values. We're taking critical bilateral relationships to a new level. Our decades-long alliance with Japan is stronger and more consequential than ever, reaching new frontiers from space to quantum computing. We signed the Washington Declaration with the Republic of Korea, bolstering our cooperation to deter threats from North Korea, and the Jerusalem Declaration with Israel, reaffirming our commitment to Israel's security and to using all elements of U.S. power to ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. We agreed to new basing and posture arrangements with allies Australia and the Philippines. The U.S.-India strategic partnership has never been more dynamic as we team up on everything from advanced semiconductors to defense cooperation. And just a few days ago, in Hanoi, President Biden cemented a new comprehensive strategic partnership with Vietnam.
All right. Well, let's now go across to Ramakrishnan Sridharan, consulting editor with News9, who joins us live from Washington, D.C. As always, Shri, great to have you on Global Lens.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you very much for that.
Okay, let's discuss what Antony Blinken said there. The sum and substance of his remarks is essentially this. The US-India strategic partnership has never been more dynamic as we team up on everything from advanced semiconductors to defense cooperation. It would be hard to quarrel with him on this one.
Absolutely. I think Mr. Blinken is stating facts as they are, because the way the defense industrial complexes of the two countries are coming together, Neha, it is truly unprecedented. And the point to be noted is that India is now getting the best of technology, the most sophisticated technology terms which India feels most comfortable with. For example, we are not just talking about getting a fish. We are talking about India learning how to fish. So the knowledge transfer and the homologation that comes with all these technologies is perhaps the most important aspect, and something which had so far been a stumbling block in transfer of high tech to India. So if US has started making these concessions, it's obviously because it realizes that there's a strategic purpose that India also serves on the global stage, especially as a counterbalance to China, which increasingly is not just intractable, but also more and more belligerent in its foreign policy. So this is definitely a very significant mark. And the fact that, at the sidelight of G20, Biden and Prime Minister Modi announced the India, Middle East and Europe corridor, where US is a very, a strong partner. This is a shift which is happening to a much higher orbit than what India and the US had engaged in earlier, given all the historical reasons, the fact that we were closer to Russia, USSR, partly because of US, because it refused to give us arms and ammunition at that time when India didn't have a defense industrial complex of its own. So I think this is now coming together of the world's most powerful democracy and the world's biggest democracy coming together to create a more stable world order, where a country like China, which is dictatorial, is hegemonistic, will be cut to size, and therefore that a new world order can prevail, which is far more stable, and there's fairness in the global ecosystem.
Absolutely. Not only is the India-U.S. strategic partnership stronger than ever before, Antony Blinken significantly also referred to the Quad, something that has irked China a great deal in recent times. All right, let's move on to our next story, Shri, which is also from the US. Will President Joe Biden face impeachment? That's the question many are asking. And now President Biden has publicly addressed House Speaker Kevin McCarthy's potential impeachment inquiry. The president's response comes as his advisors prepare to tackle the latest showdown with the GOP leader, with implications for the upcoming government funding deadline of 30th September. President Biden has linked the potential inquiry to this funding showdown, emphasizing that his primary focus remains on issues impacting the American people. Biden said, and I quote, "Well, I tell you what, I don't know quite why, but they just knew they wanted to impeach me. And now the best I can tell is they want to impeach me because they want to shut down the government. I've got a job to do. I've got to deal with the issues that affect the American people every single solitary day." President Biden's aides have been gearing up for a potential impeachment inquiry since House Speaker McCarthy hinted at such a possibility in late July. This week, though, he officially launched an impeachment probe against the president. The main objective of Biden's team is to counter any narrative suggesting wrongdoing by the president despite a lack of concrete evidence so far. A source close to the White House has been quoted as saying, if you don't answer it, it can sink into the voter's psyche. They are walking that line. The impeachment inquiry adds a layer of complexity to President Biden's political landscape, given concerns about his age and re-election prospects. Some of his allies worry that the intense scrutiny on his son Hunter Biden's business dealings could negatively impact Biden both politically and emotionally. Despite these challenges, the White House sees an opportunity in the impeachment inquiry. They believe it can be used to their advantage if Republicans are perceived as overstepping or neglecting their governing responsibilities. The White House has adopted a rather aggressive messaging posture, emphasizing the lack of evidence linking the president to any illegal activity. They're actively engaging in cable news appearances, social media campaigns, and direct communication with news executives. The question is, could this in any way impact President Biden's 2024 campaign?
You see Republicans in Congress, right? They have spent all year investigating the president. That's what they have spent all year doing, and have turned up with no evidence, none, that he did anything wrong. I mean, that is what we've heard over and over again from their almost year-long investigation, and that's because the president didn't do anything wrong. Even House Republicans have said. The evidence does not exist The House Republicans have said that.
Okay, let's go back to Shri to analyze this. Shri, there are multiple factors at play here. Yes, we know that there isn't any concrete evidence that links President Biden either to any illegal activity or even to his son's business dealings for that matter. Of course, the son has been facing scrutiny for a long time now. But the question is, how is this likely to pan out in the run-up to the 2024 presidential contest? President Biden believes that the Republicans are doing this because, quote unquote, they want to shut down the government. But this goes beyond that. You know, this has repercussions for 2024, or does it? How do you think Team Biden is likely to play this political game in the days, weeks and months ahead? There are those who believe this could become a headache, given that the president's popularity ratings are anyway not all that high. And of course, what the Republicans are hoping for is that this somehow sticks as an issue on the mind of the voters when they go out and vote in next year's election. On the other hand, there are those in Team Biden who think, hey, hang on, we can actually turn this to our advantage. How do you see it?
So, Neha, when you have a lion chasing two people, you don't have to outrun the lion. You only have to outrun the other person, right? So, in this case, it doesn't matter that President Biden's, popularity is a little less. He only needs to lead Trump in popular opinion. So that said, if this were not a year when we are going into elections, Neha, I don't think the Republicans would have brought an impeachment motion for a simple reason. I mean, they have been digging around for more than a year. I mean, almost for 3 years now, actually. And they have not found anything which directly implicates President Biden. So they have actually no significant grounds on which impeachment, motion to be brought. In fact, as President Biden said, they don't know why they bring the impeachment motion. But the fact is, this is an election year, and where messaging and perception plays a much larger role than actually facts and reality. So there's a poll that CNN did, about, I think, a week ago, where 61% of Americans believe that President Biden may have done something wrong in the Hunter Biden, saga. So this is how perceptions are built, manipulated, and managed to, win elections. And that is the only reason why President Biden has actually stepped in with a comment, so that he can make his point of view very clear and tell people of, America, look them directly in the face, say that I've done nothing wrong. There's nothing against me, which even the GOP, candidates and others admit. So, but going forward, Neha, I don't think President Biden is going to engage in this impeachment, repeated denial of wrongdoing. I think it'll be left to his strategy team, the communications team, to counter this in whatever way that they can. The president will obviously be focused on other issues. For example, the shutdown that's coming. He needs to, rustle support to increase the debt ceiling so the government's expenses can be maintained and the government can keep running. And the other thing is, of course, going into election, he has to rally voters. He has to connect more deeply with the American voters, at least the Democrats, and convince them that he's the right candidate to lead America for the next 4 years, starting 2024. 2025 is when he'll be sworn in, if elected. So I think that's what his focus will be. But given that this is an election, kind of situation, next year are going to be elections, and the Republicans will try and sow as much doubt as possible, as any political party would. Republicans or Democrats would have done the same if a Republican president was in this position. So this is political, fights that are happening. Ultimately, how much of this trickles down and how successful is the White House or the Democratic Party in fighting this and managing the perception? Because one thing President Biden can't afford is for American voters to think that in some fashion, maybe he's involved with his son's dealings. So that could be a pretty tricky situation for the Democratic Party, Neha.
Well, you know what they say, Shri, keep throwing mud at somebody and hope some of it will stick. That really seems to be the Republican game plan here. Will it work? I guess we'll find out only in November 2024. All right, let's now move on to our next story, which is from Russia. Well, following the rare and closely watched summit between Russian President Vladimir Putin and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Russia, Putin has accepted an invitation to visit the North. The high-profile summit, which has sparked discussions of a potential arms deal between the two nations, took place in Russia's Far East and included promises of Russian assistance for North Korea's space program and discussions on possible military cooperation. Kim Jong-un, known for his isolationist stance, extended an invite to President Putin to visit North Korea, which was immediately accepted. North Korea's state news agency has said Putin accepted the invitation with pleasure and reaffirmed his will to invariably carry forward the history and tradition of the Russia-DPRK friendship. DPRK, of course, a reference to North Korea. During their private talks, Kim expressed his belief that Russia would win over its enemies. The summit has raised serious concerns among Western nations, particularly the United States, about the possibility of illicit arms deals between Russia and North Korea. Such an agreement could have significant implications for the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. This meeting signals a potential shift in Northeast Asian geopolitics with a stronger alliance between North Korea, Russia and China, potentially destabilizing the region. Analysts have expressed concern about the impact of North Korean ammunition on the conflict in Ukraine. Amid Russia's isolation in the West due to its actions in Ukraine, President Putin has lauded the strengthening of cooperation and friendship between Russia and North Korea. The offer of Russian assistance in building satellites for North Korea also has raised concerns and objections from the U.S., citing potential violations of UN Security Council resolutions. The U.S. State Department has issued a statement saying, "We've taken a number of actions already to sanction entities that brokered arms sales between North Korea and Russia, and we will not hesitate to impose additional sanctions if appropriate." Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia was accompanied by a significant military presence, including top Russian military officials, highlighting the depth of their cooperation. Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department has approved a $5 billion sale of advanced F-35 fighter jets to South Korea. This decision, as we said, comes against the backdrop of Kim Jong-un's meeting with Putin, underscoring regional tensions. The sale of these fighter jets is seen as a measure to bolster South Korea's defense capabilities and maintain interoperability with U.S. forces in the region. The U.S. State Department says this sale will not disrupt the military balance in the region. Tensions on the Korean Peninsula have been on the rise, with Kim Jong-un criticizing joint military exercises between the U.S. and South Korea, viewing them as potential preparations for an invasion.
When you see what looks to be increased cooperation and probably military transfers, as we've said for some time, we have reason to believe they were going to discuss military transfers. That is quite troubling and would potentially be in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. Possibilities of weapons flowing two different ways here, right? With respect to either direction, we would watch very closely and be concerned and will not hesitate to impose sanctions if and when it's appropriate. So it says something about the overall context of how this war is going for Russia. And with respect to what any outcomes might be, we have taken a number of actions already to sanction entities that have brokered arms sales between North Korea and Russia, and we won't hesitate to impose additional actions if appropriate.
Okay. Going back to Shri at this point, Shri, lots to unpack here. Of course, we've known for days now that the United States has been greatly concerned by this growing Putin-Kim bromance and camaraderie and the cooperation that is likely to happen in the area of defense. The big question here is, if North Korea were to supply ammunition to Russia for its ongoing war against Ukraine, which seems to be an inevitability, what impact do you believe it is likely to have on the Ukraine war? Could it become a huge headache for Ukraine and NATO? That's one. And two, you know, this growing talk about the nexus that is, or shall we say this axis that's now emerging in Asia between Russia, China and North Korea. You know, there are those who said this could be destabilizing for the region. Does that sound far-fetched, or is that a matter of concern indeed?
So Neha, first of all, the invite to Putin is diplomacy par for the course. It's courtesy that when a leader visits another country, he invites the leader of that nation to come and visit his nation as well. So, I will not attach much significance. If it happens, it'll probably happen next year because Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, is supposed to go visit North Korea in October this year. So that's the easy bit. Now, your question was if North Korea ends up giving ammunition to Russia, what happens? And what will be the impact on the Ukraine war? Obviously, this is going to prolong the war. Ukraine of late has been claiming that it is reclaiming some parts of the territory occupied by Russian. I think it can, that will be a setback. Anyway, the progress for Ukraine is very slow because the mines which Russian army has planted as they have retreated from the Ukraine territory. So they are making very, very tentative progress. So that's a big challenge for Ukraine in recovering its territory. So we are then looking at a more prolonged war because, backing Ukraine is like U.S. and Europe and all the sophisticated countries with, very, very sophisticated arms. And now the next question is, you hinted at this terrible triad as some analysts are calling. So when I look at what's happening, first of all, Putin and Kim don't need to put up a song and dance if they really want to do something which is like, hush hush and very strategic. This is a show they are putting on for the world, for the US, for Europe, and all the others, to tell them as a warning, as a political warning to them that what can happen. Now, will Putin actually end up giving Kim anything significant? I have my own doubts. Certainly, I don't think that's going to happen that easily, Neha. So the one man who's smiling as this bromance is put on display is the man who's not even in the scene. That's President Xi Jinping of China. Now, let me explain why I say that. Now, if you have to de-escalate the situation, who are you going to talk to? You'll have to talk to Kim or Putin. As far as Kim is concerned, I think the boat for any kind of negotiation, any kind of rapprochement with him has probably sailed. Now, with Putin, he's not going to back off from this Ukraine war because it'll be a huge loss of face for him. And he cannot, back off without winning something substantial, at least some major concession from Ukraine in terms of land or some parts of the country. So now, who does the world turn to broker a peace and to get them? And who's more powerful than these two people? I mean, Kim is nothing. Putin is a very strong leader with a big country, but China is much bigger, more powerful. Who will they turn to? It'll be Xi Jinping. So, if I've been saying that this is happening with China's blessing, it's possibly because China wants to escalate this bromance to a point where the Western powers have no choice but to come running to China and say, okay, let's make a deal. We'll go easy on you a little bit, but then you help us de-escalate this situation, because the only people Putin and Kim will listen to is Xi Jinping. So this is how I think this whole thing is going to play out, Neha. But are they coming together? Yes. But ultimately, is it something which can hold for and endure for long years? I don't think so, because all of them are dictators. And one of the characteristics is low trust in anyone, especially other leaders. So this might be happening in a short time. This might be on display for a few months, at least if the war is going on. But eventually, there will be de-escalation, and a key role will be played by China in de-escalating the situation, Neha.
Okay, so you're saying the love story may not be an enduring one, but I still want to ask you, you don't believe it's a terrible triad, Sri?
Well, it is a terrible triad in the sense that they have very, little regard for international frameworks and international institutions. And they seem to be solely focused on their own interests, even at the cost of, the sufferings that millions of people are going through, especially in countries like Africa, because of the food shortage and the food inflation. So to that extent, it is a terrible triad. Some analysts with what they call is right. But I think there would be a way to de-escalate the situation. And the China route is what I think Western countries, including U.S., will take to get to that point, Neha.
Well, as rhetorical as it sounds, I think terrible triad is a fair description. All right, lots of stories from the United States tonight, Sri, where you are. And now we have a story for you, which is actually from the tech world. Google is once again in the spotlight, and not for the right reasons. The tech giant has announced a new round of hundreds of layoffs in its recruiting department. These cuts come as part of ongoing cost-cutting efforts in Silicon Valley. Google is a subsidiary of Alphabet, and this decision follows Alphabet's earlier move in January this year when the company eliminated 12,000 jobs, accounting for about 6% of its workforce. The company continues to grapple with economic uncertainty, especially in its core advertising business. During Google's July earnings call, CEO Sundar Pichai had said the company was continuing to slow its expense growth and pace of hiring. A Google spokesperson has said, "We continue to invest in top engineering and technical talent while also meaningfully slowing the pace of our overall hiring." While it's not clear how many employees will be impacted this time around, Google has emphasized that this move is not part of broader layoffs, and those affected will receive severance offers and other benefits. Things have drastically changed for this tech major just in the space of 2 years. Alphabet had significantly expanded its workforce in 2021 due to a surging demand during the COVID pandemic. But last year, the company faced challenges as its core digital advertising business slowed down amid economic uncertainty. This year, Alphabet has been actively focusing on cost-cutting measures to stabilize its business. Google reported nearly 15% year-on-year profits in July, largely due to the recovery of its search and YouTube ads businesses. As of the end of 2022, Alphabet had over 190,000 employees, but by June this year, the headcount had decreased to less than 182,000. Google's layoffs are not isolated in the tech industry, though. Other major players, including Meta, Microsoft, and T-Mobile, have also made substantial job cuts this year in response to economic challenges. Meanwhile, in another significant development, the U.S. government has accused Google of paying out $10 billion annually to Apple and other firms, alleging it's a strategy to maintain a monopoly in online search. This accusation came on the opening day of a landmark antitrust trial against Google, which many say is the most significant case of its kind in the United States in over 2 decades. Earlier this week, in a crowded federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., the U.S. Justice Department argued that Google uses its wealth and influence to stifle competition and maintain its dominance as the most popular search engine. The lead investigator said, and I quote, "Google's contracts ensure that rivals cannot match the search quality ad monetization, especially on phones." Through this feedback loop, this wheel has been turning for more than 12 years. It always turns to Google's advantage. Now, Google countered the argument by stating that internet users rely on the search engine because of its quality. Critics have long expressed concerns over monopolies in the tech industry, where a handful of giant companies, including Google, control much of the market, with their influence stretching from popular platforms to data acquisition and devices. Google alone commands about 90% of the search engine market. So what does this really mean? To understand this better, let's go back to Shri. Shri, there are a couple of things here. Of course, the layoffs at Google continue, which certainly is bad news for its employees and for the tech industry in general. But more significantly, let's talk about this antitrust trial that is taking place. Would you agree with those who say that this is probably the most significant antitrust trial that's happened in the U.S. in the last few decades, and why is it so significant? That Google has a monopoly is really not in question. But why do you think this trial is so significant? What outcome could it possibly have?
So, Neha, the fact that Google has 90% of the search market is what has triggered the Justice Department to look into its practices. But how significant is this? And whether it will serve the purpose, I tend to disagree a little bit. Let me explain why. The timing of the antitrust case against Google, I think, is a little off. If this case had been brought by, let's say, the Justice Department 5 years ago, or even 7 years ago, or a decade ago, it would have made a lot of sense. But now we are at a time when generative AI is fundamentally reshaping the search business itself. Now you have Google scrambling to come up with Bard as its own answer to OpenAI's ChatGPT, because the nature of query itself is changing, Neha. For example, if you wanted to make, let's say, a margarita, you'd Google for a margarita recipe, right? you'll probably get 10 pages or 3 pages or whatever, and then you'll go through everything and then pick the best. Now, on generative AI, on OpenAI ChatGPT, you can simply ask the ChatGPT engine to give you a recipe. Similarly, if I'm researching for an article or a story, I would, in the traditional search, I would go download a bunch of information, collate everything and write, finally write something. In ChatGPT, I can ask ChatGPT to write me 1,000 word, 500, 200 word, whatever the length of the article is, and it'll write that article in seconds. So this is the fundamental shift which is happening. So I don't know how relevant, Justice Department's argument that, Google is hogging the search market is going to remain relevant, given that the search market itself is rapidly changing. And look at the growth of ChatGPT, the way it is becoming popular. 3.5, model is available to everyone free of cost, but the ChatGPT 4.0, which is the most sophisticated one, which has far more data sets, and it's far smarter and faster also. That is going to be revolutionary. So I think Google itself is grappling with the whole debate on how should it respond to ChatGPT. It is, of course, it's got its own DeepMind, deep learning project, the AI project, which is going to be where it's spending a lot of money. So that is why I say that this antitrust case which has been brought against Google is perhaps a little too late in the day, Neha.
Confession time, Shri. Very quickly, everything you say on this show, does it come from you or ChatGPT?
100% from me.
Okay, I trust you on that. Thank you for the clarification. Moving on to our next story, which in fact involves a war of sorts between China and the European Union. Let's get you the details. In a move that has ignited a diplomatic and economic firestorm, the European Commission has initiated an investigation into China's electric vehicle subsidies. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced the probe accusing China of artificially lowering EV prices through massive state subsidies and flooding global markets with these vehicles. The investigation could lead to punitive tariffs, raising concerns about potential retaliatory actions from Beijing. China has reacted sharply, terming the probe protectionism. China's Commerce Ministry has said the investigation is a naked protectionist act that will seriously disrupt and distort the global automotive industry and supply chain, including in the European Union, and will have a negative impact on China-EU economic and trade relations. It added, China will pay close attention to the EU's protectionist tendencies and follow-up actions and firmly safeguard the legitimate rights and interests of Chinese companies. While some analysts believe Chinese EV makers can pivot to other growing markets like Southeast Asia, the probe could tarnish the international reputation of these companies as they expand abroad. Following this move, the Hong Kong-listed shares of major Chinese EV manufacturers took a hit, as did European car makers. This probe comes amid broader diplomatic tensions between the European Union and China. Relations have been strained due to China's relationship with Russia following the conflict in Ukraine and the EU's efforts to diversify its trade partnerships. The outcome of this investigation will set the stage for bilateral talks ahead of the annual China-EU summit, with the European Union seeking greater access to the Chinese market and a rebalance of the trade relationship. Industry insiders and experts have varying opinions on the investigation. While the China Passenger Car Association has expressed strong opposition to the review and called on the European Union to take an objective view of the industry's development, EU officials believe that Chinese EVs are undercutting local models by about 20% in the European market, pressuring European automakers to produce more affordable electric vehicles. As this investigation unfolds, it will be closely monitored for its potential impact on global trade and diplomatic ties between China and the European Union.
But global markets are now flooded with cheaper Chinese electric cars. And their price is kept artificially low by huge state subsidies. This is distorting our market. And as we do not accept this distortion from the inside in our market, we do not accept this from the outside.
Okay, let's go back to Shri for more on this. Shri, the business journalist and you can explain this better to us and put the entire issue into perspective. Why, of course, China gets upset about everything these days, but why is China seeing red over this move by the European Union? How is it likely to impact its EV industry? And is it likely to further strain ties between the European Union and China?
Only happy to explain this, Neha. So, Neha, the first thing we have to understand is that subsidies per se are something that every government around the world gives to its industries to help them from time to time. Now, the question is how much subsidy and what is the subsidy really aimed at? Now, let me explain. So, let's say you're giving an industry subsidy. Now, is that subsidy going towards research and development, adoption of newer technology, which eventually leads to innovation and greater efficiency? Therefore, the whole ecosystem improves. Or you are subsidizing inefficient production by absorbing their losses. So that is essentially what the debate boils down to. So every country gives subsidies. In the case of China, the only problem is its subsidies are massive. By various accounts, the subsidies range from 1.7% of the GDP to 2.5% of GDP. Now, we talked about EV. In the case of EV alone, over the last 7 years, it has given $57 billion in subsidies to EV manufacturers. Now, Leha, let me do a simple calculation for you. If one cost, the cost of one EV car, let's say, is $50,000, dollars. So when we talk about $1 million being given in subsidies, it effectively means 20 cars can be given away free for that price. So now 20 into 1,000, that's 20,000 is a billion. For $1 billion, we can give 20,000 EV cars free. So now 20,000 into 50, 1 million EV cars. So literally over the last 7 years, China has given away 1 million EV cars just to be able to compete in the market. So that is outrageous, even for a European Union. And as a large supplier of all the critical raw materials that go into the EV battery, and that is the most important, component, the battery, the rare earths that go into the battery. And China is a monopoly supplier of many of these items. So it is able to, capture some advantage, additional advantage, apart from the government subsidies. So that is what is distorting the market. It also extends to not just manufacturing, but also agriculture. Again, billions of dollars China, puts in agriculture to subsidize exports. So China's core strategy, in some sense, has been to basically subsidize, build, invest in infrastructure. For example, the massive roads it has built, the BRI project itself, the Belt and Road Initiative itself, in some sense, part of that, whole thinking process, where it goes into countries and subsidize their losses and gets them to build. The hazard in this, the economic and the moral hazard in this, Neha, is that what kind of an economy are you eventually creating? So if you look at some of the problems that China is now grappling with, the problem of bad debt in the banking system, the problems in the real estate sector, this in some sense is clearly a manifestation of this underlying philosophy of throwing money at economic problems. So this is not sustainable. Whereas, most efficient countries, for example, US or even India to the extent, we believe in, subsidizing the upstream activities of companies so that the beneficial effects of technology, the improvements, everything can flow downstream and translates into more competitive products end of the day and better economic health for the nation. So that is the real problem, Neha. Now, what does it mean for China's EV makers? They will take a hit, obviously, especially if European Unions decide to impose tariff on these, exporters. So it's going to set them back. But don't forget that European Union also needs Chinese market for its own goods and services and vehicles, because they also sell non-EV cars in China, right? I mean, so it's going to be a very tricky rope for Europe to walk. It has to do this without really cheesing off Beijing and make sure that Beijing doesn't do something in return which will hurt their own industries, which are non-EV driven, Neha.
Well, you cheese off Beijing and the dragon starts breathing fire. How is...
By the way, Neha, this answer was mine too, because I don't think there's any chat GPT engine which is smart enough to answer your questions yet.
Well, that is the kindest thing anyone has said to me this entire month. You get extra points for that. Thank you so much,
Neha.
Shri, for joining us. As always, an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. On that note, we're going to slip into a quick break here on Global Lens, but don't go anywhere. We have lots more on the other side.
मैं इमरान अहमद खान नियाजी सबके दिल से हल्फ उठाता हूँ।
When Imran Khan